Jos, you're a professor at Leiden University, a science communicator. You're about to take leave of your present function as a professor at Leiden University in a couple of days' time. Yet you are determined to not stop working, but continue your interests in advancing the cause of meaningful science education and lifelong learning. I understand you define yourself also as a lifelong learner. What does it mean?
Well, thanks, Jan. A lifelong learning to me means that, well, I never did and I will never take things for granted. I have a never saturated curiosity, and I think that's what is to me lifelong learning. It's also learning by experimenting. If I want to know how things work, I try them out. I'm now 66. I retired a year ago already. It didn't change too much from when I was 6. So the why is still very present. The why question and the why and the how question. Yes.
It's a matter of mindset.
It's a mindset, yes, and it's fortunate. It didn't change at all. It's probably even worse.
Yeah.
I don't know. It has always been the same. Yes.
Yeah. In the chapter that you wrote for our book, Seeking Understanding, the Lifelong Pursuit to Build a Scientific Mind, after a few introductory lines, you say, "I hated school." What's wrong with the school?
There's a lot wrong. It's formal, it's divided, and many of our educational systems are very context poor, and I think we should learn. Now, they should learn and we should teach in a context rich way. And I think that's the biggest problem. Yes.
You say it's divided. In what sense is it divided?
In subjects. And my great teachers, because that's what I'm going to talk about in a couple of days at our farewell symposium. My great teachers were holists, and I think that's the nicest things to have teachers who are holists. And I invited speakers who are all broad, who combine chemistry with geology, with astronomy, even with politics, because you can't look at the Earth without looking at politics, especially now with the great challenges we have, the climate change, etc. So we have to have a broad mind. The people who are going to solve the problems have to have a broad mind, not just chemists, but chemists with a broader view.
Has something changed about the nature of the problems that we are facing now as compared to the kind of problems that we faced in the past?
I'm not a pessimist, let me say that, but I think the problems we are facing are on a really global scale.
So they require a different kind of thinking.
Yes, and I have an example of something that we heard just a couple of days ago about the insects. There was a enormous decline in the number of insects in Germany. Well, if it's in Germany, it's also happening in the Netherlands. And it's not just if you see that the number of insects is declining, then it means there's something wrong with agriculture, but also with the number of birds that will decline. Yes, it's a sign of that something is going wrong, and that we have to tackle that problem in a much larger scale than just looking at there is a bee, so we are going to plant some flowers. No, we have to look at the complete landscape, etc., etc.
What you typically see now is that you see the problem emerge, and then we are going to attend to it if we can.
Yes.
So it would really be important to foresee the nature of problems that one has in the future. And
Yes.
you quote Leadbeater in your chapter,
Yes.
people living a century ago, and their inability to foresee what we would need in terms of learning, kind of learning environment, the things we learn, the way we learn. It's totally inappropriate now. What are some of the things that they fail to see?
Well, failed is too strong, I think, Jan, because it's not their fault. They could not foresee how big the global challenges and the global risks and also the global opportunities would be in the 21st century. Well, the changes we've seen, and I think that's our advantage. We have seen changes occur on such a large scale and in such a rapid pace that we now can learn from the changes we've seen. Even 20 years ago, we could foresee the importance of computers, but now we know that it can go that rapidly that we can make better forecasts, at least.
Yeah, but it would be difficult, even 20 years ago, for people, for instance, to foresee the social impact of social media. And
We couldn't.
Psychological impact.
No, we couldn't. But the only thing we can foresee is that the societal impact and the psychological and social impact of the changes we're going to face will even be much greater.
Yeah. Are we in a better position now than the folks a century ago to be prepared to be able to actually foresee that? I think it's a very more long-term future even than was the case then.
Yes.
They're basically in the industrial age kind of people, assuming that the industrial age would continue.
Yes.
It is not the case. But now we are facing problems like the kind that you mentioned,
Yes.
Climate change, global problems in general. Are we in a better position to say, at least feel what would be necessary
Yes.
500 years from now?
Yes, I think we are in a better position, and because we already know. There is also a great need for what Robert Keegan calls that fifth stage of mental development of elders. We now know that we need the elders and elders from any age, but because we will have elders from 18 to 108. So I think we know better where we go, why we are going to do that, and with whom we have to do that. And we are in a better position because we have a better idea of the goals, the risks, and the opportunities. I'm still optimistic.
Okay,
So, yeah.
that sounds positive.
Mm-hmm.
In your chapter, you obviously you focus on communication, particularly on the role of facilitators in that process.
Yes, yes.
You make it abundantly clear that communication for you doesn't mean a one-way process.
Not top down. Mm-hmm.
It's not top-down, it involves at least two people, and in many cases it involves a community in which facilitators play a role. You use the term incidental mentor also in that connection. What do you mean by it? What's developing the mind, developing the scientific mind? What does it imply?
I think that, well, what the philosopher Georg Gadamer calls Horizontverschmelzung, the fusion of horizons. So we no longer are allowed to look at communicators as senders and receivers, but we are people, societies, communities, from all kinds of, from all sides of the perspective, that have their values, their truths, and the real communication is the Horizontverschmelzung is that we listen to each other in the best possible way. We can learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, talking about health, because I'm interested in health communication. Health communication right now is still mostly top down, but a patient knows much more about his or her disease than the doctor, him or herself. How does it feel to be ill? And so we can learn from that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I call fusion of horizons.
The scientific mind, or when we were talking about it when we started this adventure of creating the book, and in fact before that 10-year journey to explore the issue of building the scientific mind, we became more and more aware of the fact that the scientific mind has not exclusively to do with science.
Mm-hmm,
Science in the sense that it's often perceived like physics, biology, chemistry, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So that you have to broaden this idea of science, and also that the mindset that allows you to operate in the world in a way that is inspired perhaps by the millennia-long history of science.
Mm-hmm.
that is a multidimensional mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And in your chapter you do a pretty good job, I would say, in expanding the ideas we had already developed. We had this briefer overview than you made, but it's still already quite complex. I don't know if it's a relevant question, but is there any particular thing that you say, well, this is what should have priority in our attention to building the scientific mind? One or two, perhaps three things you say, well, that those stand out.
Mm-hmm. I've thought a lot about that the last few weeks, especially the last few weeks, and I came to, not alone of course, but I came to three key words, and they're also here: awareness, awareness, have an open mind, seeing what's happening, but also seeing people around you. The second one is connectedness. You're not alone. We have to do it together. We have to connect to the people around us. And the third one is empathy. These are incredibly important issues.
We discovered a lot about the importance of attending to values when we talk about building the scientific mind. And building the scientific mind typically is something that you do yourself. You and I can't build the scientific mind in someone else.
No.
We can facilitate the process.
Yes. And for the rest, the two very important words. Well, you call it consilience here, unity, and consilience has to do with context. So context is amazingly important. So the last month I made an exhibit. Didn't have anything to do with science. It was about history, but I learned a lot about why things went the way they went in Leiden, for instance, in why even Rembrandt left Leiden, why the pilgrims left Leiden. I got an idea about that, and I wrote about it.
Yeah.
So the unity, consilience, and the never taking things for granted is incredibly important. Yes.
Finally, Jos, as people prepare themselves to read your chapter, have any advice to them?
Be a child, not as childish but childlike, and yes, play. I miss Harry Kroto, you know.
Yeah,
Yes, he is a great example of mine, and I talk about him in my lecture, and he's one of these people who understood the world and understood the playful scientific mind.
So put yourself in that same position as a reader.
Yeah.
Be playful.
Be playful. And,
Well, Jos, thank you very much.
mhm.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
Good. Great pleasure for me too.
Okay.